The age of strategic illusions is over. For 75 years, the world lived under the comfortable myth of a collective defense where values and shared history were the glue of the Atlantic Alliance. That era ended in a single room on a Wednesday morning. When NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte sat across from Donald Trump, he wasn't meeting a traditional diplomat, he was meeting the CEO of global security. The message from Washington was ice cold and stripped of all sentimentality. The American security umbrella is no longer a birthright for Europe. It is a premium service, and the bill has come due in the form of blood, iron, and a total alignment of interests. This is not a story about diplomatic friction or hurt feelings. This is a story about the brutal restructuring of the global balance of power. For decades, Europe has played a double game, relying on American taxpayers to deter Russia while refusing to lift a finger for American interests in the Middle East or the Pacific. That dynamic has reached its breaking point. Donald Trump is not just disappointed, he is executing a strategic pivot that treats NATO as a transaction. If Europe wants the United States to hold the line at the Suwalki Gap, Europe must be ready to put skin in the game at the Strait of Hormuz. The logic is simple. The logic is realist. And for the first time in history, the United States is ready to walk away if the terms are not met. Look at the map. It tells the story that the politicians refuse to say out loud. Europe is a peninsula of peninsulas, vulnerable, aging, and strategically shallow. Without the American logistical backbone, the European military machine is a collection of museum pieces. They have tanks, but no way to transport them. They have jets, but no satellite constellations to guide them. They have soldiers, but no heavy lift capacity to sustain them in a high-intensity conflict. Mark Rutte tried to argue that Europe provides basing and overflight rights. In the cold language of power, that is the equivalent of a landlord claiming he is a partner in a business just because he provides the floor. Trump knows that basing is a passive asset. He demands active power. The president's disappointment is a calculated tactical strike. By framing the Iran conflict as the litmus test for NATO's relevance, Trump has cornered the European leadership. He has identified the greatest weakness in the Western alliance, the divergence of threat perception. For Poland and the Baltics, the threat is a Russian tank division. For the United States, the threat is a nuclear-capable Iran, disrupting the world's energy arteries and exporting chaos through a network of proxies. Trump's ultimatum is clear. If NATO is not a global tool for American power, then NATO is a liability for American resources. The mention of Greenland was not a joke or a distraction. It was a masterclass in geographic realism. Greenland is the ultimate high ground of the North Atlantic. It controls the GI-UK gap. It is the front line of the coming Arctic War. When Trump links NATO's failure to poorly run pieces of ice, he is reminding Europe that the United States views the world through the lens of strategic depth and resource control. He is telling them that he values territory and positioning over treaties and handshakes. If Europe cannot secure the Strait of Hormuz for the American economy, the United States will secure the Arctic for its own survival, with or without them. The European response was predictable but revealing. They blinked. The announcement of a 2-week ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran, accompanied by a sudden European commitment to ensure freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, is a massive victory for Washington. This is not a gesture of goodwill. It is a desperate attempt to prevent the collapse of the Atlantic Alliance. For the first time, European governments are committing their limited naval assets to a theater they have avoided for decades. They are doing this because they have realized that the alternative is strategic nakedness. Consider the logistics of this shift. For Europe to operate in the Strait of Hormuz, they must rely on American ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. They must plug into American Aegis combat systems. They must use American refueling tankers to keep their ships on station. Even when Europe tries to act independently, they are merely an extension of the American military-industrial complex. Trump has successfully transformed NATO from a defensive shield for Europe into a force multiplier for American global dominance. He has forced the Europeans to pay for the privilege of being American auxiliaries. The logic of escalation here is dictated by the White House. By threatening to withdraw from NATO, Trump has created a credible irrationality. The Europeans believe he might actually do it. This gives him absolute leverage. In any negotiation, the person most willing to walk away holds all the cards. The United States provides the nuclear deterrent. The United States provides the global naval reach. The United States provides the dollar as the world's reserve currency. What does Europe provide? A market that is increasingly dependent on American energy and American tech. The balance of power is so lopsided that the term alliance is almost a misnomer. It is a protectorate. The real target of this maneuver is not just Iran. It is a message to every American ally from Tokyo to Seoul to Canberra. The era of the free rider is over. If you want American protection against a regional hegemon, you must support American objectives globally. This is the birth of NATO 2. In this new version, the alliance does not stop at the borders of Europe. It extends to any corner of the globe where American interests are challenged. If the U.S. is at war with Iran, NATO is at war with Iran. If the U.S. is in a standoff with China, NATO is in a standoff with China. The consequences for the regional balance of power in the Middle East are profound. Iran now faces a unified Western front, not because Europe suddenly cares about Iranian proxies, but because Europe is terrified of Donald Trump. Tehran's strategy of driving a wedge between Washington and Brussels has failed. The Islamic Republic now looks at a horizon where American carriers are supported by European frigates. The logistical burden of containing Iran is being redistributed, allowing the United States to maintain a high-intensity posture without exhausting its own fleet. This is how a superpower optimizes its empire. Inside the halls of NATO headquarters in Brussels, the mood is one of quiet panic. The old guard, the career diplomats who believe in the liberal international order, are being replaced by the reality of the transactional order. And so Mark Rutte's description of the meeting as frank and open is diplomatic code for a brutal confrontation. Trump likely laid out a spreadsheet. He likely showed Rutte the cost of every American soldier in Germany and every American interceptor in Poland. He likely asked, "What am I getting for this investment?" And when Rutte couldn't provide a satisfactory answer, Trump pointed toward the Middle East. We must look at the Greenland comment through the lens of maritime power. The United States is a maritime empire. To maintain dominance, it needs a chain of unsinkable aircraft carriers. Greenland, Iceland, the United Kingdom, and now the coastal states of the Persian Gulf. Trump is treating the entire world as a map of strategic real estate. He is not interested in the sovereignty of European nations if that sovereignty gets in the way of American security. He sees a world of predators and prey, and he is ensuring that the United States remains the apex predator by forcing its satellites to fall in line. The White House press secretary's refusal to rule out a NATO withdrawal was the final turn of the screw. It keeps the threat alive. It ensures that the European commitment to the Strait of Hormuz is not a one-time event, but the beginning of a permanent shift in their foreign policy. Europe is now tethered to the American mast. Every time Trump posts on Truth Social, he is adjusting the leash. The logic of power dictates that the weak must accommodate the strong, and currently, Europe has never been weaker, and the American executive branch has never been more assertive. The strategic breakthrough here is that the United States has successfully weaponized its own isolationism. By threatening to come home, the U.S. has forced its allies to go abroad. It is a brilliant inversion of traditional grand strategy. Instead of the U.S. begging for help, the U.S. is threatening to leave the party, and the guests are suddenly offering to pay for the drinks, the food, and the security at the door. This is how you lead from a position of absolute strength. You make your presence a luxury that no one can afford to lose. As we move forward, watch the deployment patterns. Watch the movement of French and British naval groups toward the Middle East. Watch the increase in defense spending in Germany, not for tanks to defend Berlin, but for expeditionary capabilities to support American missions. The disappointment Trump expressed was the catalyst for a total realignment. The Atlantic is no longer a moat that protects a stagnant Europe. It is a highway that transports European resources to support American hegemony. The myth of NATO as a club of equals is dead. It has been replaced by a clear-eyed realization of the hierarchy of power. The United States is at the top. The allies are in the middle, serving as logistical hubs and auxiliary forces. And the enemies are at the bottom, facing a consolidated wall of Western hardware directed from a single point of command in Washington. Trump has not weakened NATO. He has disciplined it. He has pruned the dead wood and demanded that the remaining branches bear fruit for the American national interest. In the final analysis, this is about the survival of the West under American terms. The world is becoming more dangerous. The margins for error are shrinking. In a world of high-speed missiles and global supply chains, there is no room for ditherers or neutrals. You are either with the superpower or you are on your own. Europe has looked into the abyss of being on its own, and they have chosen to follow Trump into the fire of the Middle East. The takeaway for any serious observer is clear. Do not listen to the rhetoric of cooperation. Look at the movement of the carriers. Look at the flow of the fuel. Look at the command structures. The United States has just reasserted its role as the undisputed master of the Atlantic Alliance. By demanding loyalty over support, Trump has changed the DNA of NATO. It is no longer a shield, it is a sword. And that sword is now pointed directly at Tehran, with the full weight of the European continent forced to hold the hilt. The era of the free ride did not just end. It was executed in a meeting between two good friends. One friend had the guns, the money, and the map. The other friend had nothing but excuses. In the world of great power realism, we know exactly how that story ends. The map always wins, the guns always decide, and the superpower always gets its way. This is not the end of NATO. This is the beginning of NATO as a true instrument of American global will. The ice of Greenland may be cold, but it is nothing compared to the cold logic of the new American grand strategy. The world has been warned. The allies have been mobilized. The CEO has spoken. The video ends here, but the new American century has just been rebooted.